He laughed so hard the room stopped breathing. $100 million. That's what the most feared Korean mafia boss on the East Coast just bet, sitting across from a woman he'd never seen before in a penthouse 62 floors above Park Avenue, surrounded by men who carry weapons the way other people carry wallets. He pushed the check to the edge of the chessboard and grinned. 100 million, if you win. His men laughed with him. Every single one, because in 11 years, across 4 countries and hundreds of games, Kang Do-hyun has never lost at chess. Not once, not ever. But nobody in that room noticed her hands, steady, already reaching for the first pawn, no tremor, no hesitation. The hands of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment. And what happened over the next 47 minutes didn't just humiliate him, it dismantled everything he believed about power, control, and who deserves to sit at the table. But before I tell you how she destroyed him, you need to understand why she was in that room in the first place, because that part of the story is the reason none of this was ever about chess. If you've ever walked into a room where nobody expected you to belong and refused to leave, this story was written for you. Subscribe to Tales by Wave right now. This is the kind of family that doesn't look away when the odds are ugly. 3 hours earlier. Amara Osei was standing outside a building in Midtown Manhattan that doesn't appear on any map. No sign, no directory listing, just a steel door, a camera, and a man whose neck was wider than her entire shoulder span. She was still wearing her work clothes from the actuarial firm in the financial district, pencil skirt, flats, a bag that cost $40 and carried everything that mattered to her in it. She looked exactly like what she was, a 28-year-old black woman from Harlem who calculated risk for a living and had no business being within 10 blocks of this building. But her brother was inside, Niall Osei, 24, the kind of young man whose charm ran faster than his judgment. He'd borrowed money from the wrong people 9 months ago, not street-level wrong, architecturally wrong, the kind of wrong that comes with interest rates calculated not in percentages, but in body parts. Niall owed Kang Do-hyun's organization $1.6 million. He had 48 hours left on his deadline and $1,900 in his checking account. The math wasn't complicated. Amara did math for a living. She'd tried the legal routes. Lawyers wouldn't touch it, the police were a joke, and they both knew it. 2 detectives she contacted in Brooklyn suddenly stopped returning calls after she mentioned the name Kang. So Amara did what she had done her entire life when systems failed. She solved the problem herself. She walked to that steel door, she looked into the camera, and she said 5 words that changed the trajectory of everything. "I'm here for my brother." The door opened. She expected violence, she expected intimidation, she expected the particular cruelty that powerful men reserve for people they consider irrelevant. What she did not expect was the elevator. Polished brass, classical music, a man in a tailored vest who pressed the button for the 62nd floor without being asked, like people arrived at this door demanding their brothers back on a regular Tuesday. The doors opened into a space that redefined the word excess. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, art on the walls that belonged in museums, lighting engineered to make everything look like it existed in its own private sunset. And in the center of the room, a chessboard. Not a decorative one, a competition-grade board with weighted marble pieces, positioned under a light that made the black and white squares glow like a stage. It sat on a table that probably cost more than Amara's apartment. Around the room, men, dozens of them, some in suits, some in tactical wear, all of them armed, all of them watching her the way predators watch something new enter the territory. She counted exits, 2, both behind armed men. She counted cameras, 7. She counted the seconds until someone spoke. 14. "You must be the sister." The voice came from the far end of the room, deep, controlled, an accent that sat somewhere between Seoul and Manhattan, shaped by years of operating in both. Kang Do-hyun. He stood from a leather chair and walked toward her with the particular slowness of a man who has never had to hurry for anything. 34 years old, tall for his build, lean the way people are lean when discipline is a religion, dark hair pushed back from a face that was all clean angles and zero warmth. His eyes found hers and stayed. She had prepared herself for cruelty. She had prepared herself for dismissal. She had not prepared herself for the quality of his attention. He looked at her the way a man studies a problem he didn't expect to find interesting. "Your brother owes me $1.6 million," he said. "He has 48 hours. He doesn't have it. I do," she said. She didn't, but the way she said it, clean and certain and utterly without tremor, made two of his men shift their weight. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture she would later learn meant recalculation. "No, you don't," he said. "But you're interesting for lying about it so well." He turned and walked toward the chessboard, sat down on one side, gestured to the chair across from him. "I have a different arrangement in mind," he said. She didn't sit, not yet. She stood in the center of his $60 million penthouse and looked at him with the particular stillness of a woman deciding exactly how much danger she's willing to walk into. "What arrangement?" He placed one finger on the white king, tapped it once, twice. "I'll play you," he said. "One dame, you win, your brother's debt disappears. All of it, plus $100 million. Cash." The room went silent, not the comfortable silence of people listening, the electric silence of people who think they just heard something impossible. She waited. He smiled, the kind of smile that has nothing warm behind it. "You lose," he continued, "and the debt doubles, $3.2 million. And you stay." Stay. The word landed in the room like a blade dropped on marble. She understood what it meant. She understood the particular vocabulary of men who use single words to describe arrangements that other people would need contracts and lawyers and paragraphs to explain. "You lose and you belong to this house," he clarified, like he was being generous with the translation. "For how long?" He leaned back. "That depends entirely on how quickly you become boring." His men laughed, a low, rehearsed sound, the laughter of people who have learned that their boss's jokes are always funny and the consequences of not laughing are always real. Amara looked at the chessboard. Then she looked at her brother, who she could now see sitting in a chair at the far wall, hands zip-tied, a bruise blooming across his left cheekbone. Niall's eyes were wide, terrified, begging her silently to leave. She pulled out the chair across from Kang Do-hyun and sat down. The laughter died. Amara just sat across from a man who has never lost, with her brother's life and her own freedom on the line. If you leave now, you'll never know what her hands already knew, that his arrogance couldn't see. Stay with tails by wave. This is where it all breaks open. The first move belonged to Amara. White opens. She advanced her queen's pawn, d4, standard, classical, the kind of opening that tells an experienced player nothing about your intentions, a closed door. He responded instantly. And f6, the Indian defense, aggressive, modern, a statement that said, "I'm not afraid of your structure. I have my own." She played c4. He played e6. She developed her knight. He mirrored. For the first 8 moves, the game looked like a textbook. 2 careful players building architecture. No drama, no fireworks. The men around the room shifted, bored already. They'd seen him play before. They knew the explosion always came around move 15 when his attack formations converged and his opponent started making panic decisions. Kang Do-hyun was not just a good chess player, he was a predator at the board. His style was suffocation. He built pressure slowly, methodically, cutting off escape routes one by one until his opponent realized too late that every option led to collapse. He didn't beat people with brilliance, he beat them with patience and inevitability. He studied Amara's face between moves, expecting the usual signs: the slight sweat, the too fast breathing, the fingers hovering over pieces they weren't sure about. He saw none of it. She played like she was breathing. Each move arrived without performance, without drama, just quiet certainty laid down on the board like she was placing stones in a garden she'd already designed. By move 12, something shifted. He couldn't name it yet. It was like weather changing. The temperature in the game dropped. Her pieces weren't just developing, they were coordinating, communicating across the board in a language he was starting to hear but couldn't yet translate. On move 14, she sacrificed a bishop. Not a careless sacrifice, not a desperate one. She placed it on a square where his pawn had no choice but to take it, and when he did, something opened in the position that hadn't existed before. A diagonal, a ghost highway running from her queen's territory to his king's neighborhood. He looked at the board differently now. The arrogance didn't leave his face, but something underneath it moved, the particular internal adjustment of a man who has just discovered that the ground he's standing on might be hollow. By move 18, Kang Do-hyun was playing defense. He wouldn't have called it that. He would have called it repositioning, strategic patience, the language powerful men use when the truth is too embarrassing to say plainly. But the board told a different story. His pawns were fractured, his king was exposed on two flanks, his pieces were tangled in each other's way, unable to coordinate because her earlier sacrifices had created structural damage he was only now beginning to fully understand. She had been building this position since move 4. Everything she'd played. The quiet openings, the seemingly passive development, the sacrifice that looked reckless. All of it was architecture. Amara Osei had walked into a room full of armed men, sat across from a man who owned portions of this city, and started building a trap on move 4 while he was still laughing at her. The room noticed. Conversations stopped. Men who had been checking phones and watching doors were now watching the board. The energy shifted from amusement to attention, then from attention to tension. On move 22, he made a mistake. Not a blunder, a subtle inaccuracy born from the particular blindness that confidence creates. He moved his rook to a square that looked strong, but left his knight unprotected on the queen side. It was the kind of error that a weaker player wouldn't notice, that a club player would miss entirely. Amara noticed it before his fingers left the piece. But she didn't take the knight, not yet. She played a quiet move instead, a pawn push, one square forward, so innocent it looked meaningless. His lieutenant, the large man standing closest to the board, actually snorted, like she'd missed her chance. She hadn't missed anything. That pawn push unlocked a combination that was 3 moves deep, and when it detonated, it would cost him his rook, his knight, and his queenside structure simultaneously. She just needed him to not see it for 2 more moves. He didn't. Right now, Kang Do-hyun still thinks he's winning. He doesn't know that the woman sitting across from him set a trap 9 moves ago that's about to blow his position apart. If you scroll away, you'll miss the exact moment power changes hands. Most people won't stay for the payoff, but you're not most people. That's why you're part of Tales by Wave. Move 23. He moved his rook centrally, reinforcing what he thought was his strongest file. Standard, logical, exactly what she needed him to do. Move 24. She captured the knight. A clean take that forced his rook to recapture. The moment it did, the pawn she'd pushed 1 square forward was now a loaded weapon. It threatened promotion, it threatened his bishop, and it tore open a file that gave her rook direct access to his back rank. He saw it. All of it. 3 moves too late. His jaw shifted. A tiny movement. The only crack in the architecture of his control. But Amara saw it because she had spent 23 years reading people's faces across chessboards. She knew exactly what that micro-expression meant. He just realized he might lose. The room felt it, the particular electricity of a moment when something impossible starts becoming probable. Men who had been standing casually were now upright, alert, because if their boss lost, something in the physics of this room would change, and none of them knew what that meant. Niall was staring at his sister from the far wall, zip-tied hands gripping the chair, tears running silently down his face. He wasn't crying because he was afraid. He was crying because he recognized what she was doing. The same patterns, the same quiet architecture, the same devastating patience. Their father had played exactly like this. Kwame Osei, West African immigrant, mathematics professor at City College, the man who taught Amara to play chess at 4 years old, on a board he'd carved himself from walnut wood, who sat with her every evening in their Harlem apartment running through Grand Master games while her mother cooked jollof rice and shook her head at both of them. Kwame died when Amara was 17, heart attack at the lectern during a calculus lecture, sudden and absolute. He left behind a wife, 2 children, a shelf of chess trophies, and a daughter who had already beaten every junior champion on the East Coast before her 15th birthday. After he died, Amara stopped playing, put the board away, went to college, built a career, became someone who calculated risk instead of creating it. She hadn't touched a chess piece in 11 years. Until tonight. Until she sat across from a man who had her brother's blood on his hands and $100 million on the table, and looked at that board and felt something wake up inside her that she thought she'd buried with her father. The ghost of Kwame Osei was in every move she played. His patterns, his patience, his particular genius for making aggressive men believe they were safe right up until the moment they weren't. Amara buried chess when she buried her father. She hasn't played in 11 years. And tonight, she resurrected everything he taught her to save the only family she has left. If you've ever carried someone's legacy inside you and waited for the moment it mattered most, this story is your story. Subscribe to Tales by Wave. We don't tell stories for people who give up. Move 27. He tried a counterattack. Aggressive. Desperate in the way that only disciplined men are desperate. Not wild moves. Calculated violence. He threw his remaining bishop into her territory, offering a sacrifice of his own, trying to blow open the position and create enough chaos to escape. It was the best chess he'd played all night, and for exactly 45 seconds, it worked. Her position buckled. His bishop tore a hole in her pawn chain. His queen swung into the breach. For one terrifying moment, his knight was threatening her king and her rook simultaneously. A fork. Deadly. The kind of tactical shot that had ended games for opponents who were much better prepared than she appeared to be. The room exhaled. His men straightened. The lieutenant almost smiled. Kang Do-hyun looked up from the board and studied her face, searching for the crack, the panic, the sweat. She was doing math. Not chess calculation. Actual math. The actuarial kind. The kind where you look at every variable, assign probability, account for risk, and find the path through the disaster that leaves you standing. 7 seconds of silence. Then she moved her queen. It looked like a retreat. It looked like fear. She pulled her most powerful piece away from the action, back to her own first rank, tucked behind a pawn. 2 of his men actually chuckled, but Kang Do-yoon didn't laugh, because he saw it. From that square, her queen controlled a diagonal that ran the entire length of the board. It pinned his knight, it protected her king, and it created a discovered attack that would activate on his next move regardless of what he did. She hadn't retreated, she had reloaded. His counterattack was dead. Not in one move, in all the moves that followed, because every response he had now created a worse problem than the one before it. This is what chess players call zugzwang, a position where every possible move makes things worse, where the obligation to play is itself the punishment. Kang Do-yoon stared at the board for 4 minutes, the longest pause of the game. His men were silent. Niall was silent. The city 62 floors below was probably loud and oblivious. But inside this room, nothing moved. He picked up his knight, put it down. Picked up his rook, put it down. Then he looked at her. Not at the board, at her. And for the first time since she'd walked into this room, his expression wasn't arrogance or amusement or calculation. It was something she didn't have a word for, something between recognition and bewilderment, like he was seeing her, actually seeing her for the first time, and what he saw didn't fit inside any category he had. "Who taught you?" he asked. His voice was quiet, not defeated, just honest in a way it hadn't been before. "Someone you'll never meet," she said. She picked up her rook, placed it on the open file, the one his pawn push had created 16 moves ago, the one she'd been waiting for since the 4th move of the game. Check. His king had one square, one legal escape. He moved it there. She brought her queen down the diagonal, the long, lethal diagonal that her retreat had activated 2 moves ago. Check. One more square, one more escape. Forced, predictable, already dead. He moved. She placed her knight, the piece that had been sitting quietly on the rim of the board for 12 moves, doing nothing, waiting, like its owner. Checkmate. The word didn't need to be spoken. It existed on the board in black and white and geometry and silence. Kang Do-yoon stared at the position for 11 seconds, counted, recounted, searched for the miracle. There wasn't one. He picked up his king, held it in his palm, a marble piece worth nothing and everything. Then he laid it down, on its side, the universal gesture of surrender. The room was silent. 60 armed men, not one sound. Amara's hands were steady. They had been steady the entire game, but under the table her left knee was shaking, and she could feel her heartbeat in her throat, and the adrenaline was so thick she could taste copper. She did not let any of it reach her face. Niall was sobbing, quietly, the exhausted, disbelieving sound of someone whose life just changed directions so fast the fear hasn't caught up yet. Kang Do-yoon stood, slowly, deliberately. The room adjusted around him the way rooms always do. Men straightened, postures shifted, the hierarchy recalibrated because whatever just happened at that chessboard, nobody had seen it before, and nobody knew what it meant. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Amara with an expression that had no name in any language she spoke. Then he reached inside his jacket pocket, pulled out a phone, and made a call. "Release him," he said. No pause, no negotiation. Release him and clear the debt. He ended the call. Then he picked up the check, $100 million, written before the game in the particular arrogance of a man who never expected it to be cashed. He walked it to her side of the table, placed it on the edge of the board, right where it started. "You earned this," he said, "every cent." She took the check, folded it once, put it in the $40 bag that carried everything that mattered to her. "My brother," she said. "He's already being released. Downstairs. Car is waiting." She stood, picked up her bag, took 3 steps toward the elevator. "One more thing," he said behind her. She stopped. Every muscle in her body told her to keep walking, to get in the elevator and get her brother and get out of this building and never look back. She turned. He was standing beside the chessboard, looking at the position she'd created, the checkmate, the geometry of her victory still frozen on the board. "Your father," he said, "was a brilliant man." Everything stopped. She hadn't told him about her father. She hadn't mentioned Kwame Osei. She hadn't said a word about who taught her or why she'd stopped playing or what this game meant beyond the debt and the money. "How do you know about my father?" He looked at her. That expression again, the one without a name. "Because I've been looking for someone who plays like that for a very long time." A pause. "And because the last person who played me to zugzwang with a queen retreat was a mathematics professor at City College 14 years ago in a tournament in Seoul. Your father beat me when I was 20. I was the best junior player in Korea. He was the only man who ever made the board feel like a conversation instead of a war. His voice dropped. I looked for him for years. I didn't know he'd passed until tonight, until I saw his patterns in your hands. Amara's chest felt like it was being compressed. The air in the room changed. Everything she thought this night was about, the debt, the money, the danger, the arrogance, all of it suddenly sat inside a frame she hadn't known existed. He wasn't just a mafia boss who liked chess. He was the boy her father had beaten in Seoul, the boy who'd been so shaken by the loss that he'd studied Kwame Osei's games for years, searching for the mind behind the moves, carrying the memory of that defeat like a wound that never fully healed. And tonight, across a board in Manhattan, that wound opened again, dealt by the same hands. Different fingers, same soul. Her father beat him 14 years ago in Seoul. Tonight, his daughter finished what he started. If this story doesn't prove that what we carry from the people who raised us is more powerful than money, weapons, or fear, nothing will. If you felt that in your chest, share this video. Someone in your life needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed to Tales by Wave yet, I need to ask you honestly, what are you waiting for? Amara stood in that room for a long moment. She could feel the weight of every eye, but the only ones that mattered were his. You knew, she said quietly, before I sat down. You knew who I was. He shook his head slowly. I suspected the surname, the way you walked in without fear, but I didn't know until move 4. He paused. D4, C4, knight to F3, bishop to G5, your father's exact opening sequence from Seoul, move for move. Something cracked inside her, not breaking, opening, like a door she'd sealed 11 years ago when they lowered the casket into the ground, and she swore she'd never sit at a board again because every square reminded her of his hands. Her eyes burned. She did not let the tears fall, not here, not in front of these men and these guns and this impossible night. Why the bet? She asked. If you suspected, why offer $100 million? He was quiet. When he spoke, the arrogance was gone, stripped down to something raw and private, the voice of a man who had built an empire to cover the hole that one loss, one conversation, one game had torn in him when he was 20 years old. Because I needed to know if it was real, he said, if what he had could survive past him, if the thing I've been chasing in every game since Seoul was a fluke or a bloodline. He looked at the board one last time. It wasn't a fluke. Amara felt her father in the room. Not a ghost, not a fantasy, just the particular density of a presence that never fully leaves the people who carry it. She took one step toward the elevator. Then she stopped. The check, she said. Keep it. He blinked, the first uncontrolled reaction she'd seen him all night. My brother's free. That's what I came for. The money was never the point. She pressed the elevator button. He watched her step inside, watched the doors begin to close, and in the last 3 inches of visible space, he said something that was barely loud enough to cross the room. I'll see you again, Amara Osei. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a question, it was something much more dangerous than both. The absolute certainty of a man who has just found the only person alive who speaks the same language he does. And Amara, standing in a brass elevator with a $40 bag and her father's ghost and the shaking knee she'd hidden for 47 minutes, said nothing, because she already knew he was right. Downstairs, Niall was waiting, unbound, shaking, alive. He grabbed her the moment the elevator opened, pulled her into a hug so tight it reset something in both of them. She held him, held on, let the trembling finally come because it was safe now, and the parking garage smelled like concrete and exhaust and ordinary life. Add emotions make the story very interesting. How? He whispered into her shoulder. She didn't answer. She couldn't explain that what she'd done in that room wasn't courage and wasn't strategy and wasn't even chess. It was the only conversation she'd been able to have with her father in 11 years. They drove home to Harlem in silence. The city was loud and lit and indifferent. A Tuesday night. People walking dogs, restaurants closing, the ordinary machinery of 10 million lives turning without any awareness that 62 floors above Park Avenue, something had just shifted in the architecture of power. Amara parked the car, walked upstairs, locked the door, sat on her bed in the dark. And then she opened the closet, reached past the winter coats and shoe boxes, and pulled out a walnut chessboard, hand-carved, 23 years old. She set it on her nightstand, ran her fingers across the squares, and for the first time in 11 years, she cried. Not for the game, not for the money, not for the fear, for the man who taught her that 64 squares could hold an entire language, and for the boy in Seoul who had heard that language once and spent 14 years trying to hear it again. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She looked at the screen. One message. Same time tomorrow, my board. No bet, just the game. She stared at the words for a long time. She should delete it. She should block the number and take her brother and leave Manhattan and never think about marble chess pieces and penthouses and the way his eyes changed when he recognized her father's fingerprint on the board. She typed back 2 words. Bring coffee. And in a penthouse above Park Avenue, Kang Do-hyun read those 2 words and did something his men had never seen. He smiled. Not the sharp, performative smile of a man who owns rooms, a real one, brief and unguarded and immediately controlled, but real. Because the most dangerous man on the East Coast just learned something that all his power and money and weapons couldn't teach him. There are things you can only find by losing, and the woman who just taught him that lesson is coming back tomorrow.